Well, thanks for that lively discussion. You know, throughout our day, we want to acknowledge our sponsors like AgriPlus Solutions, 2020 Seed Labs, and the Alberta Wheat Commission. Next up on our global adventure today is the UK, where we catch up with Jerry Alford. Jerry is an Arable and Soils advisor, and his role involves advising organic farmers and assisting farmers considering conversion to organic farming. Jerry has been running the UK part of something called the Eco-Feed Project, as well as supporting a project on reducing antibiotic use by operating a farmer field school with a group of dairy farmers. And Jerry is also part of the Fabulous Farmers Project, facilitating learning networks. Jerry has run 6 innovative farmers field labs. As well, he ran the family dairy, beef, sheep, and arable farm in the UK. Well, today he will talk with us about these innovative farmer field labs, which include things like trap crops, intercropping, living mulches, and the Thames Water Trial. Welcome, Jerry.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation, the opportunity to speak at your conference. I am Jerry Alford. I'm the Farming Advisor at the Soil Association. One of the organisations that the Soil Association is part of is something called the Innovative Farmers Programme. Innovative Farmers has been set up to support farmer-led innovation, and we are about to start celebrating our 10th year, so it's a very significant moment for us as an organisation. So what is the Innovative Farmers Models? What's it all about? The whole concept behind Innovative Farmers is that we have farmer-centred, multi-actor approach to co-innovation. Sounds very complicated, but in reality what we do is we work with the farmers so that they can take the knowledge that they've gained on their own farms and in conjunction with other organisations and researchers, and make sure everybody else finds out about it, so that even the mistakes get talked about as well as the positives, so people don't repeat the same errors, and we learn from other people's benefits and gains, and we'll work together. There is within this a sustainability focus. The whole point is it's inclusive, and it is attempts to reduce inputs and the effect on the environment of our farming practices. We work very closely with industry and with the academic partnerships. So this isn't about farmers taking over, this is about working together on a co-design precision. We make sure that it's always practical and collaborative. So the farmers are the centre, the researchers are working with the farmers. By our organisation with facilitation and with grant funding, we can make sure there's some money available to support the farmers on this. And we also are maintaining ourselves as independent and with open source data and results, so that our website, innovatefarmers.org, has all the information about all the field labs that we run. All results are held on that, and even the poor results are put there so that everyone can see what's happening. What is also very important is lots of people can do research. It's very easy to do research, and it's important to us that the information is spread through knowledge exchange, through events that we hold, through press and online, speaking at conferences. We support with information and also with newsletters, and as you'll see in a minute, we're now using videos as well as a further means of disseminating our information. What do we mean by co-designed research? What we feel is very important that farmers have the right to demand appropriate research. What that means is they want to have the information and the research done on areas that they want to know about. It is not being told by a research organisation or a commercial company, this is what we want to do research on, this is what we want to do because we want to sell you something. We really are trying to work with group members who are both knowledgeable and knowledge users, and we are looking at the problems looking for a solution versus being a solution looking for a problem. Complaint we often get from farmers is a lot of the research is either proving points we already know, or actually what it's doing is trying to justify an input that we don't really necessarily need. And so the development phase of a field lab is actually crucial so that we know that what we want to do now and what we're working on is something that the farmers want to know and researchers will benefit from working on. Okay. So how Innovative Farmers works, and this is where we come from a very different angle to a lot of other organisations and structures. What happens is a group of farmers will come together around an idea. Sometimes they will come to us with an idea as an individual, and we will then ask around the farming community if other people are interested in the same thing. Sometimes it's a group of farmers who are already working on something. Sometimes it is a researcher who's looking for a group of farmers that works on a particular question or a particular subject. And the important point to make here is that we need to have a question that we want to answer. Research for the sake of it doesn't achieve it. So we want to have a really strong question. What we will then do is match the researcher, the farmers, and also a coordinator. He's the nag in the background, or she's the nag in the background, the one who makes sure the researcher sticks to the brief, one who makes sure the farmers do what they've promised they would do as part of their trial. And together they turn this initial idea into a field lab, which explores the challenge or trial a new farming practice, or look at an old farming practice to see whether it actually is still appropriate to use in today's modern world with today's modern equipment. The group then decides together what data to record and monitor, and want to ensure this trial is both scientifically robust and practical for a working farm. We make sure this is information that farmers would generally want to collect themselves. We found from experience that asking them to go out to do botanical assessment of grass lays is something that becomes tricky. Yield data using tramline yields, using combine yields, or things like that works well on a farmer world. And then the final stage is we then look at the outcomes of the trials to see, did it work? The group will analyse the findings, identifies what's been discovered. The results are shared with the farming community online and through the media to make sure everybody becomes aware of what's actually being done. So what we have achieved so far is that since 2020, when we were launched, we have run 110 farmer-led research projects across the UK. We have awarded over £400,000 of funding in small grants to groups of farmers. And the point to make here is often the amount of funding that's available for trial is only in the region of about £10,000 direct to the farming group. They are paid for the inputs that they are required to do as part of the trial. They carry the risk of it going wrong, and so they are very invested in this trial coming right. Two specific examples of trials that we've been involved with. A trial we ran or been involved with on intercropping was part of a European funded project called Diversify. And we ran a field lab between 2017 and 2019, where we found that intercropping increased the overyield or yield of the crops planted in the field whilst decreasing the inputs needed. There's a lot of work being done on intercropping worldwide, and we're well aware of the benefits that you can actually get average yield of crops across the field of up to 30% more. And what we've calculated is that in the UK, if we were to introduce intercropping in a wider area of the UK's arable crop, we would achieve an increase of production, which has an economic value to the farming community. Alternatively, we could also lead to better land management, making even more land available without decreasing overall yield, whilst increasing the space available for food production or planting, reduction of feed pressure on other areas. We've also discovered is that partly as a consequence of the fact that some of the herbicides are not usable within an intercropped bean and barley crop, for example. In the field lab, intercropping beans and wheat has reduced the weed burden by 75% for 2 years running. That's very significant from an organic point of view, but also for a conventional point of view. And as we say, if it's been done on an average UK conventional farm, it would lead to reduction in herbicide applications of at least 30%, we've calculated, which could add up to £73 per hectare per year. So quite a significant effect on the economics of the break crop, which maybe isn't always the most economic on a farming system. We've also now, obviously, if we are growing pulses along with the cereal crop, the field lab has just shown that intercropping oats or oilseed rape together with legumes has provided sufficient nitrogen for the crop, meaning farmers could avoid the need for artificial fertiliser. If this was done, it would reduce 30 million in fertiliser costs across and a 10% reduction of artificial nitrogen would result in a reduction of 300,000 tonnes of CO2 associated with artificial fertilisers. And in a move towards net zero, we are going to have to look to ways of reducing the dependence on nitrogen fertiliser in farming specifically in the UK, but across the world as a whole. Another trial that we've recently started running is one on using a living mulch. The concept behind the living mulch is that we have a permanent understory of white clover and we grow combinable crops within that. The fascinating aspect about this particular trial is this has been run with a group of organic and conventional farmers, all of whom are coming to the same place in their thought processes, but using a different direction. For the organic farmers, the fact that we can carry out this cropping without needing to plough and cultivate, with the additional cost in terms of carbon, soil damage, and also the fact that we then create an environment ideally suited for weeds. Whereas from the conventional farmer's point of view, if we can find a way of releasing this nitrogen, making it available to the crop, not only do they save the need to use fertilizers, they can save the use of herbicides and potentially reduce the need to use any cultivations as well. So for both groups of farmers, they're coming to the same place from a different angle. Through the United Farmers Network, what we are doing is pulling these farmers in together. And the conversation around the table, which is an important part of the United Farmers Network, between dyed-in-the-wool conventional farmers with a dependence on chemicals and fertilizer, and the organic farmers who are trying to find and want to farm without, because that's what their customer wants, is a fascinating conversation when you get people discussing drill types and cultivation types and not arguing about their different farming systems, but understanding the need for both to come to a different place.
We're trialling whether it's possible to produce cereals direct drilled into a permanent living cover that is there not just in between other crops, but throughout the whole process. In our case, living mulch is clover, but I guess it could be any low-growing crop. Our challenge is to grow a cereal crop within that living mulch.
You've got the clover, probably no more than 6 inches tall, hopefully in the bottom, and then you can plant in one way or the other your cereal crop or your beans. They both happily survive together. You take your crop off at harvest and you're still left with that living mulch underneath, and it then can be grazed or whatever suits the farm.
There are a number of potential benefits to this living mulch idea. The reduction in ploughing is probably the key one, and the benefits that will come from that, whether that's carbon or soil health or weeds, annual weeds. Ploughing is expensive, power harrowing is expensive, and if we can reduce those cultivation costs and reduce our fuel use, that's positive financially as well as environmentally. In a mixed system like ours, we also get the grazing benefit. Grazing sheep in and around our rotation is the way we do it, to try and use the sheep as a fertility building operation in their own right. This is a time of year in August where normally our stubbles are yellow and lifeless largely. By having a green cover visible immediately on the day that we combine, once that straw's gone, the mulch is a grazable crop ready to go at a time of year when to be able to bring lambs on here, for example, in the next couple of weeks, that's quite valuable.
When you combine the crop, if you can immediately bring the sheep onto there, then you've cut out 6 months worth of work and waiting for the clover and the grass blade to establish. So whilst we all assume there will be a yield penalty because of competition for nutrients and moisture, it's just trying to work out over the entire farm whether the yield penalty is worth putting up with when you consider how much more grazing you can have and ecologically how much better it is to have living roots in the soil all the time.
Conventional farmers have a lot to gain, particularly reducing their inputs and cutting down not just on the sprays and the fertilisers, but also diesel costs and labour costs. You know, they're big costs.
What have we learned? We've learned we can do it. We've learned we can certainly establish clover undersown. We can direct drill into it. We know that will make perennial weeds worse, but we now know it will virtually eliminate annual weeds. We can get a crop to harvest, that's clear, but we need to close that yield gap and work out how to favour the cereal at the expense of the clover as it goes through. We can accommodate a 0.6 tonne to the hectare yield penalty without being any worse off financially, and that's basically savings in cultivation costs. There are a great number of non-costed benefits. It's impossible to put figures on those. The carbon sequestered, the improvements to soil health and soil structure. So we're going to have to think very carefully about what those non-costed benefits and disadvantages, the build-up of perennial weeds being the obvious one, equate to.
The important thing would be to choose the species of white clover to start with. You mustn't choose a plant that's going to be too competitive with your cash crop. The smaller leaf clovers hopefully will be strong enough to suppress weeds, but not too strong to be detrimental to the cash crop.
White clover's worked well. We went for the 70% micro wild white clover, which in theory is very short. I'm interested in trying pure micro and really going as low as we can. I think I would certainly recommend that. I would recommend not introducing anything tall, certainly no grasses, and anything that's going to get up in that crop. It rewrites the rules in a way, and the whole system of nutrient budgeting changes when we have clover growing alongside our crops. This does create really quite an exciting possibility that we may not even need to follow the principle of a fertility building period, which of course organic arable farmers have to carry that financially throughout the rest of the rotation. But if we have clover in the ground, either mature or juvenile clover, every year for our cropping period, do we need then a fertility building clover lay at the end of that to replenish the nitrogen in the ground? Quite possibly not. It's certainly challenging the basic concept of fertility building followed by exhaustive cropping. Now we've combined the two things together. I guess it's like all good trials. We've answered one or two things, but in answering those, we've created a whole load of new questions. We're producing a human food crop on the top, we're producing a fabulous pollen and nectar mix and a great habitat in the middle, but also underground we're building soil and fixing nitrogen and feeding soil life all at the same time. So all three things are simultaneously happening.
So I hope you found that interesting, the way that we're now using these ways to disseminate our results, because the biggest problem we have with research is we can do the research, but how do we get that information out into the public domain so everybody can benefit? Has anyone got any questions?
Welcome over to our Zoom platform to everyone as you're coming in. We're so pleased to have Jerry with us live. Jerry, what kind of a winter day is it over in the UK where you are today?
It's just one of those grey, miserable days England's quite famous for, I think.
Hey, but it's not -20, which it is in many parts of Alberta. So
It's definitely not -20. Now, where I lived in the south, we very rarely get -20. So at least I put up with a grey if it's not that cold as well.
that's right. All right, just a reminder to everyone that you do have the chat function. So if you just click on the little bubble at the very bottom of your screen, you can ask a question of Jerry, or if you prefer to ask it in person, just use the put up your hand function, and then you can come on up live and unmute your microphone, and then we'd be happy to have your question. So one question that's already come in, Jerry, from George says, how does your organization get its funding? That's the question that has first come up.
Okay, so in the UK, there's not a lot of government funding for agricultural research. So one of the reasons IF was set up was because a lot of the research was being done from a very commercial point of view. So Innovative Farmers itself is funded as a group effort between the Soil Association and Organic Research Centre. We also have funding from Waitrose, which is one of our supermarket chains, the John Lewis Partnership, and the Prince of Wales Charitable Foundation, who funds research and support for farmers. So that's the combination. And then we have a certain amount of input of time from match funding from research organisations. So often they will do the research working with us, and their input will be their research time.
And that's always a tricky balance because you need the research, but I'm guessing you want to maintain your objectivity for that open source data aspect of it too.
Absolutely. The Soil Association being an organic organisation as well, we tend to be pushing much more on the sustainable no input type systems, and that doesn't fit with the agenda of the supply chain to a certain extent. So we are looking at what the farmers are interested in, and that becomes a tricky one. So none of the people we work with tell us what we do. We make decisions on where we do the research and what work we want, because we want to do it on stuff that farmers themselves want to do. That's the reality. That's the most important thing of this. This is the farmer orientated side. We call it farmer led, but really it's farmer directed or supported.
And how do you get the word out? What are your primary means of kind of communicating the results?
With the results, we have a website, innovativefarmers.org, in which all the research from all the trials that we are on appears on that. We have good relationships with the press, and for example, most of the stuff that we do, we will do our very best to get preemptive articles into the magazines and online, and then of late, the video we showed at the end is one of a more recent direction. So by using a YouTube channel, sticking it on Twitter and Facebook, there's a very strong farmer Facebook side of things, and so and Twitter. And so this one went on. In fact, it got found on our Facebook page and got stuck on Twitter before we'd even got as far as putting it on ourselves. So it's brilliant. And it came from a farmer that follows us, and that's it. So it was a really good direction. But we also use conferences like this where possible, but and internally in the UK, we obviously have conferences as well where we go and speak about these things.
Great. Now, if people want to follow you on Twitter here in Canada, what is the Twitter handle?
iFarmer.
iFarmer? Okay.
I think it's
Perfect.
iFarmer. Yeah.
Now, Scott has asked, how many growing degree days do the farms that you work with get in a year, and how much rain typically would you get? Just a comparison. Okay,
so growing degree days is not a term we actually use a lot of in the UK. We most of the region, it's 365. Generally, even today, in a cold, wet day, it's about 9 degrees outside. So we tend to have an all year round growing season. One of the reasons, for example, that the living mulch concept works is because we don't get that very hard frost, very cold winter period. So we probably have got people planting cereal crops today in the UK if it fits their rotation, particularly for roots and stuff like that. So trying to take everything we do to fit into Canada doesn't work in the same way as taking what Canada does to fit into the UK, but what we would like to do is learn and adapt from what people do in other countries.
And what about moisture? You mentioned it's a rainy day. What kind of moisture do you typically get in a year?
Work in inches or centimeters in Canada. I can still work in inches. So my farm was about 28 to 30 inches a year, which is quite a dry farm. Some of these other farms have 35 to 40 inches of rain. It varies, and it's quite as the last few years it seems to be wetter in August and harvest than it has been during the growing season. But in general, we have the bulk of that would be between October, November through to March. So our growing season then is warmer times in the spring into summer.
Good. Okay, we have Scott. He's popped up on our Zoom, and if you just want to unmute, go ahead and ask your question, Scott. Still not quite hearing you.
Okay, now how's that?
Gotcha now. You bet. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if my video is working or not, but
yeah,
I guess if you can. Okay, it's not showing me that it's working, but
we can see you.
Okay. The main thing that I wanted to just, it's kind of a question, kind of a something for you to comment on, is those infographics kind of give the impression that it's very simple, or if farmers would just adopt these, we'd have all this less nitrogen and all this less chemical use in one of them. So it kind of gives the impression in the general public that they should just be able to do these, and a lot of times it's not quite as simple. One of the things on one of those infographics, it said up to 30% yield increase, which sounds amazing, but I don't know if that would happen all the time. So I guess it's more of just a concern that I see, and I've seen it in a lot of things where it kind of gives this impression that things are very simple to do, and then but it's not as easy when it gets to the farm level.
No, I quite agree. That 30% increase is that we know that the land area index in terms of the intercropping is that you do get a 30% increase in total crop yield. It's not 30% more wheat or 30% more oat, it's the yield on the area. We're trying to highlight to the farming population that there is an alternative way of farming. There is other routes that you can take, and there can be positive benefits that you get. So by reducing the negative aspects of, and what we're having in the UK at the moment, there's an awful lot of pressure. We know this on the carbon footprint situation. We're looking at pollution, and the government is moving towards a payment for public goods as a support system rather than an ownership for land. So we are trying to make sure that people are aware that just because they've always done it, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to carry on doing. Maybe there's another way of looking at some of your land and some of your systems, and that's very much the direction that we just want to highlight to farmers, that maximum production doesn't necessarily result in maximum profitability, because the yield is king argument, or the yield is key. Profitability and margin should be key, not necessarily yield. And that's the angle that we're trying to highlight to the farming population. But I take your point absolutely by just trying to say, oh, 30% increase the yield. Everyone in the country reads that and said, oh, well, farmers are being stupid. They could increase yields by doing this. No, it's not that simple.
Yeah, I guess the concern is that sometimes that can get out into the popular media or even government policy, and and then they see these things and then they think that everybody should just be able to do it. So
yeah, it's a fair point.
Just one little comment. I think your rain was right about 10 times the amount of rain we got in this entire growing season here. So
yeah, we if you take the growing season rainfall of August, I think it was probably about 10 to 12 inches. So we are a maritime climate in the UK. Okay. And so we have, that has to be factored into every thought process that we do, that we tend to get rain. Jokingly apart, we do tend to get rain most months.
And wouldn't it be great if the new payments you're talking about would be able to have some of that go to research, like your organization? That would be wonderful if it could be directed.
We are absolutely pressing government to put more money into farmer-led research, and research at the bottom end, and not putting research into massive, great research project which proves that the moon goes round the sun and the wheel is round. You know, we prove everything continuously, and our research we try to make it statistically significant or accurate. We replicate the trials as much as possible, but we are working at farmer levels. And we all know, farmers, you see the best wheat variety or corn variety or bean variety because your neighbour grows it. You don't look too deeply into the science. You trust that the background has got that right. And so it sort of picks up a bit on that, educating farmers and moving them forward.
Good. Okay. Well, Ken, I see your smiling face. You've got a question for Jerry as well.
Hi, Jerry. Ken Coles here. I'm the Executive Director of Farming Smarter, and I'm a 2022 Nuffield Scholar. And
Excellent.
I want to study, thank you. I want to study exactly your approach. And I actually have a trip planned to the UK mid-March, and I'm wondering if I could come visit you in some of your farms, as long as Omicron doesn't stop me from doing so. As
long as Omicron or Delta or Alpha or whatever else,
whatever the next transformer is,
whatever the next one is, absolutely delighted to welcome you to come and see us, and we can take you around some of the farms and some of the work that we're doing, and hopefully we can have some meetings at the same time that you can come along to and see the approach we have in the field.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. We're currently working busily, including the last question, fella Scott. We're working on an application to the federal government for this living lab concept as well. So we're hoping that we'll have some actual federal grants. And I think our organization has operated in that, but we're in the same boat, challenged to find support and funding for sort of that farmer focused approach. And it's definitely a challenging one. I think another sort of follow-up question then is yes, we collaborate with scientists as much as we can, but it seems that desire to have published science, at least in the funding world, is winning over this really practical, adaptive side. So I'm wondering if you have any tidbits of knowledge on your guys' approach to improve sort of the perception of that and the importance of that section of the innovation system.
Yeah, it's a frustration that we have, and I have as an advisor, is that the research is done, but it sits behind a paywall that I don't access because I haven't done enough research. I appreciate there's a funding aspect to it. So that's one of the approaches that we have. If you go onto our website that I mentioned, you will have to register, but that's it. Once that, you've got access to all of the report. And we're trying to get rid of that particular aspect to make this research available to everybody. And it's really important because funded research is useful, necessary, but why is it being funded what they want it for? Whereas the farmers don't need to know that much detail. They just like to know that it works or it could work, and they see someone, and it's getting on farm. And the video clip we showed when we had a bunch of farmers sat around, that was the first event we'd run post the lockdowns in the spring, which is why we were so far apart and trying to keep apart. But farmers had met each other for the first time. And one of the important aspects of what we do is those meetings are amazing for the conversations that go on, which may be very little to do with the actual research, but it just brings farmers into the same place and direction of travel. So
thanks so much.
Open funding as much, and open research and results is absolutely massively important for a farmer.
Going back to your living mulch experiments, you mentioned that it was critical to pick the right type of white clover. Did you have to go through some trial and error to kind of get a variety that didn't, hamper the yield too much, or did farmers already have a pretty good idea about what kind of white clover might work the best?
Yeah, that was one of the problems that we found. We've already found that in this trial, that we working with a seed company, and they advised us which ones would be most suited. We've already decided that they were wrong. They've decided they were wrong. Based on then they've done a little bit of work and one or two bits and pieces on this as well. But part of the answer to that one is depends on what your system is. And before everybody else joined us, we mentioned cattle. I think if you were to have cattle as grazing rather than sheep grazing it, you would want the taller grass, the taller sort of species. We think the shorter ones will be the most useful because they'll be less competitive. That's the gut feeling we have at the moment. And there are farmers who are putting in cover crop or the living mulches for next season, and they're planning to use the shorter, smaller growing ones because they're perceived to be less competitive, particularly for moisture and for rainfall. So we're learning, and we talk about it. So we talk about the fact that we've got to use these varieties for your system. Everything from row crops and type of drill used and all the other things are all an important part of the conversation. And our idea is we just trigger the conversation. There isn't an answer to the question of living mulches. There is just advice and support and knowledge exchange that takes it forward. But yeah, mistakes we've made already, we've known about, and so we're already adapting and tweaking. Because the advantage of our sort of trial is you can adapt and tweak each year. Whereas if it was a statistically run scientific trial, you've got to do it for 3 years with replicates, with the same species and crops and whatever to make it scientifically 100% accurate. But for a farmer, they can live with a variation.
And I guess too, it depends on what kind of a yield loss you're willing to sacrifice on the crop to gain on the livestock end of it. I guess if you had cattle, maybe that formula would change a little bit.
Looking at UK prices, and we were looking on just the organic, the most successful ones up to now have been on the organic, and the conventional guys have struggled to get the germination and a sufficiently strong living mulch. But we are saying something like a 22% reduction in yield, allowing for a value of the grazing, still is a break even at an organic level. So and that accounts for the cover crop seed you're not going to use, the cultivations you're not going to use, adding in the value of the grazing. One of the things we found in some soil analysis results we've just had back is there was a 30 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare availability of nitrogen as a result of the living mulch. Now, soil nitrogen sampling results are not a precise science, but it demonstrates that we are leaving nitrogen there for the next crop, which we hope to harvest. So again, there's a cost and a value to that. If that reduces, and I don't know what's happening in Canada, but I know what's happening in the UK with nitrogen fertilizer prices, that they are 3 times what they were 2 years ago. That has a significant economic change to the costings as well.
Yeah, well, I think the situation is very similar here, and supply, of course, also of commercial fertilizer is a concern as well. And so where are you at with the whole intercropping? Is that kind of a new concept, or it's been around in organic and not so much conventional, or are people starting to look more to intercropping? Is that whole concept starting to gain some momentum there?
Yeah, we're finding there's, particularly in the organic sector, perhaps less so, but the intercropping define it. We talked in this one about beans and something called oats that's now grown in the UK, beans and oats, piola, peas and canola. Again, the two work together. There's a guy who grows human consumption Carlin peas, which is a particular type of peas, using triticale as the scaffold for it to grow up to make harvesting easier. And so there's any number of areas of this that people are beginning to pick up on. But the other thing that we've also got a lot of interest in the UK is using blends of wheat varieties, because then you get that disease resistance and support and diversity, which reduces risk. So there's been a couple of trial projects being run, European funded projects, one's called Diversify, which has been looking at this. And so this trial was run as part of that. But there's an interest in UK farming about this whole idea of slightly more dimensional ways of farming, not just sort of great big monocultures, sort of up and down with agroforestry, but also with a mixture within the cropping. So it's a direction of travel we're finding in the UK at the moment.
Great. Okay, just remember, we're watching the side. If you have a question, you can just send it, type it up and send it in, or if you would like to ask it in person, just put your hand up or send me a note that you've got a question, and we'll kind of go from there. Jerry, can you give us some insights maybe on some of the other projects you're working on, or some of the ones that you've got coming up, that other areas that you're working with farmers on, and their types of projects?
There's such a wide range. One of the ones that we're just finishing now has been about trap cropping. So using, it was with potatoes and trying to control nematodes in potatoes. So by using a nightshade species which attracts them, so it protects potatoes. We've done, the livestock ones are tricky to do because there's obviously regulations about livestock. We did do some trials on looking at mastitis treatments in dairy cows, and actually testing to whether the mastitis required antibiotics or not. And so that's demonstrated a positive environmental benefit of reducing mastitis, antibiotic use in mastitis. We've done things on compost teas in the past. We've done a range of things. We're actually just doing one at the moment on hops for beer production. We're doing coverage crop trials. We've done one on organic wheat varieties because we felt that there wasn't enough research being done on what is the best varieties in an organic situation or in a low input situation. It's all been very much driven by high input systems. So I can only think of the ones I'm working on. There's such a range of them. Grazing canola with sheep in the winter to reduce cabbage stem flea beetle infestation, for example. Didn't increase the yield, reduced the risk, but one of the farmers is carrying on still doing it because he found it dealt with a weed that he had a serious problem with that he couldn't control chemically. So he's using the sheep now to weed control, accepting a possible bit of yield loss. It's one of the previous ones. So there's such a wide range that, and where do I start?
So yeah, I mean, that's interesting to know, even that you're doing everything from dairy to livestock to, and then you know, seeing how they all work together too. It really is like you said, a multidimensional approach.
Yeah.
And about 5 minutes left in the Q&A.
Okay, we've got one question here that says, great work, Jerry. Holistic approaches customized to local farms. Agronomy at its core. Lots of interesting things to learn.
Brilliant. That's, can I take that one? I'll stick it on the next newsletter book that we do. Say this is the reaction to our projects. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's right. And are you seeing more farmers all the time starting to recognize it? I mean, we've all talked for years about the innovative minds of farmers, that they have to figure things out. Are you kind of amazed sometimes at the dilemmas that they come forward with, or the potential solutions that they, suggest to be researched?
Yeah, we've obviously been going for nearly 10 years. People are now picking up on what we're doing. Farmers are innovative. So many times, even with this living mulch thing, we find the number of farmers that have been trying it themselves. But one of the farmers we do tend to find quite a few farmers we use all the time, because they keep on coming in for the next project. But one of the guys said that what he found most positive about the whole process is that he isn't the only idiot trying something, and he can talk with the other idiots, and they all work forward together. And that's the direction of travel. So yeah, they come to us some really weird ones. They come to some ideas that you look at and think, no, I can't even see how I can do a trial. And sometimes the problem isn't, will this work? Sometimes the question is trying to decide what question we want to ask, because you end up becoming a very commercial trial, saying this product is better than that product. We don't want almost yes. We need a question that you can answer yes or no to, but we also want a question you get a maybe, because it triggers other trials. So I mentioned the organic wheat variety trial we did. That's now been expanded with another organisation taking it on and doing it on a sort of a more of a field scale rather than an individual plot trial, because they could see the benefits and the advantages. So farmers will pick it up and learn. We get farmers who do the trials. We have farmers who come to the meeting, and we have people who lurk in the background and just learn off everybody else. And it's brilliant. Whichever one you want to be, you carry on, is my view on that, And I know from my own experience as a farmer, the number of times I started a trial that I forgot which tramline in the field or which part of the field I put that variety or did that particular treatment. So on this one, we actually do perhaps make it a little bit more structured.
Right, so that gives them an assistance by providing them a little bit of that structure.
Somebody in the background saying, right, if you're going to do that in that corner, we're going to do this. Everyone do the living mulch. Remember which bit of the field you haven't put the clover in or have put the clover, so we have a control that we can compare against. Put a little flag up, then you'll remember. Put it on your app on your phone, put it on your phone, put it on your gatekeeper or whatever your economy package is, so that you're reminded not to spray that corner. We're getting farmers to think about research as a tool and a support mechanism for other people, and to talk about it. Trying something and it working is brilliant. Trying something and working and you tell other people about it is even better.
Yeah, not idiots, early adopters. Isn't that a better term?
Early adopters. I was quoted Pete, but yes, our early adopters. I'm an early adopter. Someone else is trying it as well, so I don't feel quite such a. It's quite such an odd place that people do appreciate what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
You bet. Okay, Jerry, I guess we're going to wrap it up now, but maybe just remind us of the website if people want to go and get an idea on some of the research, the scope of the research work you're doing. How do they find the website?
Yeah, so it's www.innovativefarmers.org, and it's that simple.
Okay, innovativefarmers.org, the way to find it, and you can also find them on Twitter. Thank you, Jerry, for bringing us this fascinating UK perspective to our Global Crop Tour Day. We appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and have a really good rest of the conference.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.